Joining me now, Ron Hosko, president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund and former assistant director of the FBI. Ron, we thank you so much for your time as you Skype in from Alexandria, Virginia.
Good morning, JD.
From a law enforcement perspective, we know you are depending on media reports. What is your initial reaction to what we are seeing today in France?
That this is the shape of probably things to come. We've seen attacks repeatedly in Europe and in Australia. Core Al-Qaeda was beat down by joint military and law enforcement and intelligence efforts over a long period of time. But you have these individual cells that are capable of staying under the radar or on the radar, but the police can't cover every threat all the time. And that there's going to be these little calls to action, whether it's a person, a small group, or a larger group, and they're going to take action, and we see the damage that it can do.
And mindful of that, Ron, you have been on the inside as assistant director of the FBI. There has been the notion that in post 9/11 America, we have been very aggressive in terms of domestic intelligence, information gathering, the development of a no-fly list. Your perspective on where we stand in the United States, keeping track of those who might perpetrate these acts here.
I think that collectively, the FBI and law enforcement and the intelligence community do really an excellent job at trying to identify those who would do this sort of harm domestically. You've seen any number of FBI arrests over the years, principally from those who are self-motivated. They're essentially lone wolves who are self-radicalized. They get these notions. They may be in touch with Al-Qaeda or others who are like-minded, but a person is motivated to action, and the FBI has done a great job at interdicting those. However, we're in an era where, and perhaps you and I have discussed this in recent months, where there is an ongoing debate about privacy versus security, and really law enforcement is having a more and more challenging time collecting the dots. Before they connect the dots, they have to collect the dots. And it's going to make things more and more challenging for law enforcement. The other huge challenge that law enforcement has, if it's an individual, is predicting when does thought turn to action.
Mindful of that, actions taken by the administration. Last night, our president visited the French embassy in Washington to sign a book of condolence and make a statement. We understand that Attorney General Eric Holder is bound for Europe this weekend. Does the FBI have enough autonomy to have a continual philosophy of aggressive surveillance, or do you fear that General Holder and the administration's running of the DOJ has taken the foot off the gas somewhat, so to speak, about surveillance of would-be Islamic terror in the United States?
You know, my fear is that the further we get from 9/11, the more forgetful we are of the threat of Islamic terror or terror generally. And that means the growing public debate, which is an appropriate debate. The voices get louder in favor of security, that I don't want you, the government, to have any of my information, even though nothing in my information is going to suggest wrongdoing. I don't want you to touch it. And that debate needs to happen. We hear, voices in Congress calling to more constrain NSA's efforts. We hear very vocal criticisms of CIA and some of their activities post 9/11. And my fear is that collective judgment will come down in the wrong way, and we will open the door more for actions like we see going on in France right now.
And speaking of that, Ron Hosko, we're going to ask you to stay with us through the break. We'll come back and talk more to the former assistant director of the FBI. Let's continue our conversation with Ron Hosko, the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund and former assistant director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as he Skypes back in from Alexandria, Virginia. Ron, even if these brothers were on the U.S. radar, so to speak, it is difficult to fully monitor people like this, is it not?
It really is, JD. And the French will be picking through what they knew and what they did over the coming weeks as this story continues to unfold. But I think what you are going to see there is much like U.S. law enforcement and national security folks face every day, where you are constantly trying to allocate your resources based on your threat assessment of the day, the week, the month. And threats may go up the radar higher and or come down. And based on that, you're going to allocate people, surveillance assets, technical surveillance techniques. Government can't be everywhere at every time. We cannot monitor, nor should we, everyone's Facebook. And even were you to be able to do that, you still have to put into context words that may be on a Facebook post. And when do words project or really, allow you to determine what actions will follow?
So
it's very difficult.
And mindful of that, how do organizations like the FBI make that type of differentiation? Does this get into the realm of metadata?
Metadata is one factor. In a perfect world, what the FBI will depend on is human sources that are around a threat. That's everyday people, and that's informants, potentially technical surveillance, potentially physical surveillance. Physical surveillance is only going to take you so far. If you were to put a GPS on somebody's car, that will tell me where you've gone. If I'm monitoring it effectively, if I have GPS on other people's cars, that may tell me where two vehicles intersected, but it doesn't tell me who was in the cars. It doesn't tell me what the conversations were, either outside a car window or in a nearby shopping mall where people met. So it becomes very complicated, and law enforcement is bound to act based on what they know, not on what they guess. These are difficult decisions, and occasionally they'll be wrong. Somebody can come down off the radar, and because no threat is detected at a particular time, and then all of a sudden something bad happens.
Ron, in the 2 minutes we have left, let's assess the differences between the United States and France when it comes to battling terror. The French have come in for some criticism, essentially abdicating a police presence in some of those Islamic enclaves held down by immigrants encircling the city of Paris and other French cities. There's also been criticism of a kind of leniency in terms of the sentencing in the French judicial system. For example, one of the Kouachi brothers, who was funneling terrorists or fighters into the Middle East, spent a matter of months in a French prison. Do the French have a more relaxed attitude than we have in the United States, or is that unfair criticism? A minute 30 remains, sir.
Right. It does appear that that may be part of the case here. But again, it depends on how nefarious the act was or the conspiracy was that got these people in prison to begin with. And some of this is really going to be 20/20 hindsight. You know, the United States benefits greatly, I think, from this moat that we have on each coast. That distance has helped us. That France is much closer to the Middle East, is much closer to the core of these threats, really increases the danger. It increases the travel opportunity for people in and out of the country. And if they're motivated to this sort of terror, that really increases the risk to the French.
And yet, with modern transportation being what it is, and the ability to travel transoceanically, we've already seen terror on our shores, and that is something that law enforcement will be working hard here to prevent in the days ahead. Ron Hosko, former Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sir, we thank you very much for your time and your insights today via Skype from Alexandria, Virginia. Now, when we come back, we had the law enforcement component. What about the military component? Special Forces veteran Scott Neal will weigh in as America's Forum continues.